The first stage I didn't tell you is called interactive gratitude. And Sanksha now actually practiced that with people over and over before she went to the rest of it.
Oh,
Essentially, it's telling God, this is what you're thankful for and why. And then asking Him, how do you see me in my gratitude? One of the questions that I invite people to think about is, how does a gracious God think about your gratitude? When we start a relationship through fear, it's almost impossible to feel safe enough to bring our pain. People have used fear as a way to change the morality of the children of God, instead of our being transformed by love and in connection. Trust is not just information based, it's an embodied experience of expectation that's built over time.
hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Inherent Identity Podcast. I'm really excited about today's episode because we're diving into some truly transformative ideas with my friend, Summer Gross. Summer is an author, a reverend, and someone who pretty much has dedicated her life to helping others experience a deeper and more authentic connection with God. And she's not just about teaching, she's about guiding people into real, practical, and life changing encounters with God's presence. She's kind of like me. She has a group and other things that she does to just help people apply themselves to connecting. So let me ask you this. Do you ever feel stuck in your relationship with God, or unsure of how to bring your real emotions, your fears, your anger, your shame into His presence? Or have you ever wondered what it truly means to experience God's compassion, or how to attune yourself to His voice in the middle of your everyday life? Because in this conversation with Summer, she's going to share some profound insights like the power of interactive gratitude, learning to see yourself the way that God sees you, or how to experience trust as more than just a concept, but as something deeply embodied. She also opens up about how we can begin to approach our pain and laments with God in a way that brings healing and wholeness. So stick around, because by the end of this episode, I think you'll have a whole new perspective on what it means to encounter God in your story, just as you are, and how to be fully present in your life and your relationships. So let's dive right in to the conversation I have with Summer Joy Gross. Here we go.
One of the things that I'm most interested in is how to invite us from that space of theory and performance, of getting it right in our Christian life, to actually being relational and connected and near, and having the privilege of experiencing His comfort, His peace, and His love, instead of running to all these other places where we're used to running. What if the path can be traveled so many times into His presence and into His comfort and peace that it becomes our first destination instead of the last thing we think about?
Of everything that you have learned as you have gone on the journey of a more experiential relationship with God, are there things that you have found to be most impactful in that?
Yeah, there's a couple different things that have been hugely helpful. Oh man. One is being fully present ourselves. Until we're fully present ourselves on the ground, it's extremely difficult to be present to another. And that's relational, even with our spouse, even with friendships. If we are not fully present, then we're not open and ready to receive what they're bringing to the room. We're trying to figure out how we should be in the room kind of a thing. I don't know about you, but I'm a bit of a people pleaser. I'm a bit of a fighter. Fight, flight, and fawn is a very familiar territory to me. And so for me to be fully present with another person, I have to be fully present on the earth first in this moment right now. And that opens up a space of relationship. So, going through the senses of what do I hear right now? What do I feel? Just getting fully grounded in the senses right here. And then opening up to what am I thankful for right here and right now? And then turning that towards God. What am I thankful to you for? And then you are here. For me, there's a bit of an on ramp that needs to happen sometimes because of the mess that often happens in the brain, the ruminating, the overwhelm. And so everything has to die down a little bit. All the sediment has to come to the bottom of the river in my mind in order for me to be truly available to another person. But then, of course, to be truly available to God. It's like preparing the ground of my being in a way. It's like tilling the soil.
I think about my own kids. I find it hard to be present. I
Yes,
I add to the list overstimulation because
right.
when they're screaming and fighting, I know that I want to act from a place of presence, that I need to in a way if I really want to address whatever situations in front of me in a place that's connected and even spirit led. I agree with the presence. And I don't know if there's some go to practices that you do to get yourself grounded, but what do you recommend other people try?
Well, I think part of it's a practice.
Mm,
I talk about something called 10 minutes of stillness. Daniel Siegel talks in his book Aware about
mm,
moving through one sense at a time. So that seems to be a gift for me. Other thing that's a gift for me that's just really short is a statement. I receive myself and my story right now. And I receive you and where you are in your story right now. And then I can open my hands and no longer need to grip or to hold on tight to outcome. I can just receive what comes and be fully present to the other. So, relationally, that's one of the gifts that I'll often use in just being present.
I love that. I can feel that now. It's just to be able to declare that I receive my story and then I receive your story and everything that you're experiencing. I love the openness of that because anything that opens me up, because I'm so used to trying to control life. And I think we
Right.
are all
Yes.
very trained, very practiced at trying to control everything in this life. And so to just open myself up to this moment, to open myself up to having an experience with you as not just another human, but a fellow saint, a fellow
Journeyer, yeah,
fellow
right.
journeyer, fellow child of God.
Mm.
Yeah.
There was a time period in my life that I stopped journaling because I felt like I was pressing into the rumination further. It was
Mm,
a trauma that was going on in my life that it was like I was reiterating the trauma as I was writing.
mm,
Journaling has been a place of prayer for me since I was like 10 years old. It's been
mhm,
super important to me. But I stopped journaling at that time. But I found something called Emanuel journaling, which
mm,
was created by Sungshim Lopnow, who is a marriage and family therapist from Fuller. And man, She did this beautiful work. She is a Korean Christian, and she was learning about attunement
Mm.
at her Fuller counseling, marriage and family therapy program that she was learning. So she was learning about attunement, which is someone attuning to us, is someone recognizing, seeing our suffering and hearing our heart and being totally tuned into our inner life. As she was listening to Exodus 3, 7, and 8, and which is actually repeated other times in scripture, she started hearing a God who attunes to us. It was that time period of Moses at the burning bush,
Right.
and Moses's heart is still with his people. But here's God from the burning bush who says, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers. I am concerned with their suffering, and I have come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians and bring them into a good and spacious land. So we hear like all of the pattern of attunement. I've seen you, I've heard you, I'm concerned with your suffering, and I can do something about it. I'm coming. My presence is coming. I'm going to be near you in your suffering. So she started hearing all of the pattern of true attunement, and she created this beautiful journaling practice around it, which the first stage is, how does God see you right now? So, how does God see you in your place from God's perspective? What he observes in you right now, including your physical sensations. So, it's just like a physical location. So, we're doing that present moment work at
Mm.
that time. We're recognizing God's eyes are on us as I'm sitting in my desk in my office in front of the window with the skies full of snow. And next is, I can hear you, and we write from God's perspective what he hears us saying to ourselves. So what's the rumination? What's the angst? What's the joy? Like, what's in there
Mm.
that he wants to bring out and highlight? So we write from his perspective. And then step 4, how does God see your dreams, longings, blessings, upsets, and troubles? And I love this line. I want you to know I understand how big this is for your story. So he's concerned and he understands in a deep way how connected this is to your whole story. And then step 5, I'm glad to be with you and I treat your weakness tenderly. And there's something that happens in that we're able, even though we can't give ourselves compassion yet, we're able to receive the compassion of God in that
Mm.
whatever's going on. And then step 6, what resource does God have for you at this time? That has been a huge gift for me in moving through spaces of where I'm stuck or where my emotions are on high alert or where there's a cry from my heart or an ache, and bringing that out before God and allowing the Lord to attune to that place within me. And you know what? Honestly, I have to tell you that I think this is the number one reason why the Lord has healed me from shame. Because shame used to be my resting emotion.
Mm.
Shame was so normal for me that it truly was my resting emotion, and I had to experience the compassion of God in all of these different places over and over again until I could finally move towards his compassion before I moved towards the shame.
Yeah. I feel like for me, I mean, I've noticed a huge shift, but growing up in my faith is very it is very if you don't do the things, then you're not enough, you're not worthy of the
Mm,
spirit, you're less than. And even today, I still see moments where if I make a mistake, if I'm not as productive as I want to be,
mm, mm,
that the default, the go-to is some form of shame. It's
mm.
some sense of you're not doing enough and thus are not enough, or
Yeah.
you're that kind of idea. So I definitely resonate with that being a default, and I don't think that people recognize it as a default emotion that many of us experience, just because
Mm,
it's subtle and it's
mm.
so familiar that
Mm.
we just don't even know it's happening.
Yeah, that totally makes sense to me. I actually had to have it pointed out to me from
Yeah.
someone else who said, "Ah, I was at L'Abri in Switzerland, and one of the tutor's wives, Stephanie, looked at me and she said, 'Summer, you have shame all over you.'" That was a horrible thing to feel or to hear because, of course, I knew that.
Mm.
Thanks. You know, how
Now what?
frustrating to have someone tell you that when, of course, that's true, and I know that already. But she wasn't necessarily giving me a way out. She was just speaking something true, but also something deeply painful.
So when you started your journey to a better view of God, you mentioned this Emmanuel prayer. I just think in my mind that there are people who, even if they look at through God's eyes, they see me.
Mhm.
The
Mhm.
first question, I can see it triggering an angry view from God's perspective. And then finally we get to step 5 or something, and then there's he looks upon you with gratitude or with love. And
Yeah, yeah.
so
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I think that's the case for some folks, and you're right, it might take time until we can hear the truth that God cares about in us and our weakness. That the first stage that I didn't tell you is called interactive gratitude. And Sanksha now actually practiced that with people over and over before she went to the rest of it. And
oh,
essentially, it's telling God, this is what you're thankful for and why. And then asking Him, how do you see me in my gratitude? So
mm,
it starts to shift. And one of the questions that I invite people to think about is how does a gracious God think about your gratitude? And I don't know about you, but as a parent, when one of my kids spontaneously thanks me for something and throws their arms around me or brings a graciousness, it just opens my heart up wide. And
mhm.
so there's like this graciousness back and forth, this open heartedness back and forth when there's a gratitude and a response to gratitude. So I wonder if that's part of something that can be practiced beforehand. But you're actually asking one of my favorite questions,
Yeah,
which I think is so important because we do experience God often in the pattern of our original caregiver or in the way the church has told us that God is, which scripture is such a blessing. And I'm so thankful that the Lord saw fit to reveal himself through the word. And people have used fear as a way to change the morality of the children of God instead of our being transformed by love and in connection. So when we start a relationship through fear, it's almost impossible then to feel safe enough to bring our pain.
I recently watched an interview that you did with Terry Wardle, and there
Mm,
was some thoughts you shared on attachment and books that you've read about how within the first 3 years or so of our life, we learn what relationship looks like.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you could explain more about that, but I found it fascinating, some of the things that you shared.
Yeah, that's what my book, The Emanuel Promise, is about. And I just think it's absolutely fascinating. So, our brain is developed really first 3 years of our life, even from conception on.
Mm,
There's still that sense in utero of a child knowing whether they're wanted, a a child knowing whether it's a safe, loving environment through the parents, and whether they're being born into love. I think children already had that sense of that even from the womb, from being able to hear the voices and and connecting to those voices in that time. But in the first 3 years of our lives, we have our whole experience of relationships shaped through our original relationship with our caregiver. So it as we cry out and a caregiver responds and lets us know that they have joy in the response or
mm,
that they enjoy being with us, they delight in us all at all times, whether or not we are messy or struggling. We each time that we cry out, it's a bid for attachment.
mm,
And every time they come near us, they're saying, I'm with you, I'm for you. You don't have to do this by yourself. And I'm going to be here later so that you can build an expectation of future trust. Because trust is not just information based, it's an embodied experience of expectation that's built over time. So there's in those thousands of interactions, finally, we begin to believe, yes, we are safe and we're loved and we're going to be cared for tomorrow. But if we did not receive that story of I'm safe, I'm loved, and I'm going to be cared for tomorrow as well as today, then we end up taking that same story of scarcity, of fear, or of I've got to do it all myself because no one's going to take care of me into our next relationships. Now, into our relationships with our spouse, with all of our other relationships, but also our relationship with God. And so if we didn't believe that we were delighted in the midst of our struggle, our cry, because a baby is a whole that's their only thing that they can do to get their needs met, right? Is to cry out. That's their job. But if we received the idea that our cries were annoying or
mm.
frustrating or too much, then we're just going to carry that right into our relationship with God as well and not believe that our needs are desired in His presence.
I don't know if you'd agree with this, but I'd imagine 95% or more of the world didn't grow up with the perfect parents you're describing.
I
I
know
had great
I wasn't a
parents,
perfect parent. I know I have amazing parents.
and
Yeah.
yet the idea of being delighted
Yeah.
in every moment, that's foreign. There can be love and then there's delight. I think there's a difference for me.
Yeah.
And I know that it's beautiful that I have these little kids right now and that I have a son who is almost 2 years old that I get to witness. He's
Mhm.
in that first 3 years. And as you're talking, I just imagine and see and want to be the kind of father figure that can delight in them. But I
Mhm.
find it's hard.
Yeah,
I find it's
right?
hard.
'Cause unconditional love is extremely difficult
Mhm.
because we're human, right? And that's one of the things that I think it's really hard for us to make that shift is even in our imperfection, God is the perfect caregiver. He has all the time in the world. He doesn't like value the needs of his children because I don't know about you, but I grew up with 3 other siblings and there was only
Mhm.
so much attention to go around. Of course. So I know that experience as a mother. And so God is the only one that doesn't say this person's needs are up here because they have cancer and this person's
Mhm.
needs are down here cuz they're just feeling angsty today. He has unlimited capability, unlimited capacity to hold all of his children's needs.
Yeah, that's so reassuring. And I think that's what's beautiful. I remember learning this definition of faith is trusting in something or someone, and that God has revealed himself with all the characteristics of love, joy, peace, all these things to enable us to trust in him without reservation. And I've always loved that idea of as I grow in that safety and trust, not worrying about tomorrow, because that's what we do as kids. We don't worry about tomorrow. We just know that we're going to be taken care of. And
Mhm.
for me to open up to that, that has been such a blessing because then I get to walk freely each day,
Mm.
knowing it's going to be taken care of. And that's what I was missing in my life, not but a year ago. For those people that you interact with, even on a regular basis, are there patterns that you see that block them from receiving everything God wants to give them?
I think that folks often have a sense of which emotions are acceptable in the presence of God and which aren't, especially anger. I don't know about you, but I think there's a lot of women, especially, who struggle to bring anger into the presence of God and think that they've got to figure it out on their own before they bring it. I find the Psalms super helpful in recognizing that every emotion, depression, ruminating thoughts, despair, fear, even even debilitating where he's comparing himself with other people.
Mm.
And anyways, that all of our emotions are welcome into the presence of God. And I think a lot of people struggle with that.
Are there examples of, you mentioned just women struggling with bringing anger to Him? Are there examples of what that might look like?
Yeah, I think the Psalms gives us that pattern of inviting us to lament,
Mm.
inviting us just to bring whatever that emotion is at the present moment into the presence of God. I find journaling super helpful for this, and journaling uncensored
Yeah.
super helpful. Asking the question of what has this cost? What has this cost me emotionally, physically, spiritually, relationally? And just bringing it all uncensored and with as much detail as possible into the presence of God. And I think David was on to something, honestly.
Mm.
He recognized that as he addressed God and he brought all of his emotions into the presence of God, and as it came out, something would happen. A turn would happen in which he would remember, oh, yeah, but this is who you are. And it would often be focused then on the character of God meeting him or maybe one of his past stories. So he was able to integrate at that time,
Mm.
integrate from those difficult emotions into the truth of how God has met him in the past. So I do believe that's one of the things that people struggle with the most is just bringing wherever they are, come as you are, into the
Mhm.
presence of God.
So, if you were to say, even work with me in this moment, and I did have anger or stress or whatever the emotion is, would it just be a matter of, okay, Tyson, just let it all out? And then what?
And
Yeah.
what? That's such a good question. Yeah, some of the Psalms don't have that turn in them. There's 2 or 3 where it's
Mm,
just a pouring out, and God
mm,
still welcomes that, and we still use it as worship on Sunday morning. We
mm.
still read that as scripture, His pouring out, which is really interesting. But lament is always directed towards God. So it's not just a pouring out for the sake of pouring out. It's a direction. There's a directionality to it,
Okay.
a relationality to it. Dear God, this is how I'm feeling. One of the things that we'll often do in spiritual direction is invite people to take stone and to
Okay.
put them in their hand, even if you don't have stones with you, to pretend that as you speak the details of what happened, that you're just going to put it into your hand one at a time. And then as you talk about the cost and how it felt, those two, you're going to put it in your hand and then you're going to offer them to God and ask His healing, wholeness, love, and light to pour into them, His comfort to pour into them. And sometimes that's a moment of waiting and asking the Lord to fill that with His peace, with His Holy Spirit. And then after that, there can sometimes be a turn, but sometimes too, there's a moment of gratefulness, just asking the Lord to help me to remember a time when He was there for me, or where or maybe a part of His character that is an important thing for me to remember at this moment.
Yeah. And when you talk about like the cost, is it about
Mhm.
what's this emotion costing me? Is that what it's
Yeah,
about?
what the pain that has occurred that has
Yeah.
brought on this anger, there's been a cost to it.
Mm,
It maybe it's cost just a day of harm. Maybe it's a relational cost. Maybe it's a physical cost. And you experienced a lot of exhaustion, or I don't know if you're experiencing this, but sometimes the pain that you can feel it in your stomach, or there's like
mhm.
a body, it's shown up in your body in some way. And deep anger, deep hurt will often show up in my stomach. But that often means a stomach ache later, or heartburn or something like that. So there's a cost, there's a real cost to pain of any type. And as we name it, it enables God to touch it, for it
Mm,
to come out of the subconscious into the consciousness of God's loving presence and into His
yeah.
light, and He has a chance to do something with it then. If we don't
Right.
bring it up and out, it just stays there and it molds down there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It That creates much greater harm. But if we bring it up and out into His truth, the pain of our existence into His light, then that's where He can do something.
Yeah. I love that. So it's like thinking about when I think about the cost, I'm thinking about the suffering and the pain associated with all this emotion, this circumstance, this situation, whatever is present
Mhm,
for me.
mhm, mhm.
Is that
The
is that
relational
and the
cost.
relational? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm,
For for those that may have a consistent struggle in
mhm.
trying to connect with God, what would you say to them? Or what would you
Mm,
recommend? Honestly, these activities and these exercises, I think, could do wonders. But if you were just with someone and they were to just tell you, Summer, I do activities, I've been practicing, I've been trying to connect with God, I don't feel like He's there for me.
mhm.
Is there anything that you would tell them?
I'd say don't go alone. A lot of times we think our relationship with God is just us and God. And truly, I believe that we often need the table set for us. We need another person at the table. We need a group of people who are honest enough with their own struggles, with their own stories, who
Mhm.
are vulnerable enough to be able to give us the permission or even the secondhand experience of what they're experiencing with God so that
Yeah,
we begin to believe, oh, okay, this is possible. I believe that small groups are some of the most powerful ways that God uses to speak truth and light into someone's story through the body of Christ, and that we weren't meant to do this alone.
that's so beautiful. And I would agree. I would agree. If there are people that just want to connect with you, maybe you can share some of the ways that people can get involved. Because I know that you do a group, that you have
Mhm,
a group that
mhm,
can meet in that intimate setting, a place of safety, and have you guide them in different
mhm,
ways. So maybe you could share a little bit about some of the things that you do to support people in
mhm.
this.
Yeah, yeah. I have the privilege of a beautiful group of people twice a month. I meet with them at noon and at 7 on Thursdays every other week during the month. And we call it Table of the Beloved. And we do this stuff together. We get down and dirty, we get practical, we get to where, yeah, we're practicing our faith. We're not just talking about it,
Mhm.
which is really important to me because we can get really bogged down, I think, into theory. And that's what I love about what you're doing is you're talking about the how
Yes.
and moving and that yeah, these are some possibilities. This is how we do this. So Table of the Beloved on my Patreon. So I use it's called the Presence Project. And right now we're doing my book, The Emmanuel Promise, chapter by chapter, but each one is a standalone retreat that you don't have to have read beforehand. Even
Mhm.
I'm just inviting us to dive deeper into it. Yeah, the Presence Project. I think it's like patreon.com/the Presence Project. And it's the Table of the Beloved group that everyone can join. And we've just got some incredible women. It is all women, but they're like incredibly open hearted to God and vulnerable and authentic and real. And their stories are often what people are just spark so much conversation. It's amazing. They're so wise. And then I do spiritual direction groups as well
Mm.
that people could join. And that's a group of no more than 8 that's
Mhm.
completely confidential, where we sit with everyone's story. People have time to do some reflection. And then we sit with each person's story and do some deep listening and attunement. And that group
Mm.
is extremely helpful for those that may not have that kind of deep group around them, or some people who are in leadership who feel like it's a little unsafe for them to bring their heart and holy story into to be listened to. So yeah, that's those are a couple of different things that happen through that Patreon. And then I've got a podcast called the Presence Project Podcast, and we go one practice at a time. Like I teach breath prayer first, the scripture, the history, um, the how to of the nervous system in it, starting in and love for people to start with number one. That's what the podcast is about. It's such a privilege to serve this beautiful group of people. I got to meet them at a retreat in September and give them hugs and share meals with them. And I can only tell you that it was like heaven come down. It was such a
Yeah.
joy to be together. So, yeah, it just feels like such a privilege to be able to do some of this work together.
Say in the instance that you and I were to have another conversation, what you think would be important to talk about? What would you love to talk about?
One of the main things that surprises people a lot is how much God was practicing their presence even before they could practice His. In Psalm 139:14, it says, "His eyes saw your unformed body," or "Your eyes saw my unformed body before one day came to be." So His eyes were on us, even in the womb. He was
Mm,
practicing our presence even before we practice His. And I think if we could start our life and maybe our prayer time, recognizing He's been thinking about us all this time,
yeah.
and His delight is profound for His children. And His desire for nearness has been His profound hope, His design for life with Him all this time.
Isn't that beautiful? As I have reflected upon this conversation with Summer, I just want to highlight some things that I think are pretty important. One of the things that Summer said is that when we start a relationship with fear, it's almost impossible to feel safe enough to bring up our pain. So, say, for example, you grow up in a home, you might even had great parents. I had great parents that loved me and supported me, but I still felt this sense of shame if I ever did anything that was not in line with their view of what a good human does, or if it didn't align with my faith. And so if you grow up in that kind of environment, you may not feel safe to bring up the hardships. And if you don't feel safe because there is this fear or there's this shame that's underlying it, then it might be hard for you to admit or to share with God the truth of what you're going through. Now, I know for me, and there's a past episode I did with Steve Petermeyer, and he talks about how we have to tell God the truth in a deeper way, not just, hey, I'm sinning in this way. I looked at pornography again, or I yelled at my kids again, and I'm sorry, and I want to be different. It's not that. It's more so, Lord, I feel like you aren't there for me. That no matter how many times I have petitioned you, no matter how many times I have asked you to help me change, you have not showed up, or I'm still the same. And to me, that means that either you don't care or you're not even there. And so when we can get to that kind of level of truth of what we think about ourselves and what we think about God, it's hard. But here's the thing. If we grew up in an atmosphere where we're not safe to share those things, we won't share those things with God, or it will be hard to. Because we see God in the way that we see other relationships, in the way that we've experienced relationship in life. And so one thing that I found was important in the way to build up this relationship with God and a more positive view is, for example, to list out some things that you're grateful for. Like, get into a place of gratitude for your life, for the different things in your life, and then imagine what a loving father would think about you being in gratitude. I mean, I've got a little 2-year-old boy, and I was just putting on his socks this morning, and after getting him all dressed, he said, "Thank you." And it's when he says those two little words, I just want to hug that little guy, because it's so nice to be thanked, and he's just grateful. So if you could imagine what a loving Father would think of you in your gratitude, I thought that was a neat and powerful exercise that you could just keep applying again and again. And as you do so, you will grow into a better sense of safety in God's presence. Another thing that I thought was important is this idea of, until we're fully present, it's extremely difficult to be present to another. Not just to another person, but to God. For me, as I reflect on this, I think, well, I guess it's true. Like when someone is talking to me, but I'm too busy thinking about what's next on my agenda, what else I've got going on in the day, things that I want to get done, I'm actually not connecting with them. You've had those conversations when you're standing with someone. You might even be talking to them and they're not even looking at you. Like they're thinking about the next thing they got to do. They're just like, yeah, okay. And you can tell that they don't, like, they're done. And you don't feel connected to that experience and to those people. What people talk about all the time is the person that when you talk to them, you feel like you're the only person in the world, that they could just listen to you, and the smile and the warmth that's radiating from them, like that brings connection. That's someone that you want to be around. And so for me, as I reflect on presence, I mean, to be quite honest and even practical here, unless I direct my attention to the truth and the idea that Christ is standing right by me, I don't necessarily feel, I don't know, like I kind of feel his presence. I know that there's kind of like there's noises in the background of my house, like my son's crying or whatever. I can sense that there's something there, but until I maybe direct my attention, my present attention to the fact that he's here, it's harder to maybe sense or recognize or really, I guess you could say, hear or notice what he's telling me. And so in a very real way, you just practicing presence is really powerful. And it's also something that Summer and I both practice with our groups. So if you need help to just practice getting into God's presence, go join Summer's group. Come join my morning call. And come join something, a community of people that are trying to listen to God, and not just trying, but like we are listening, we're practicing, we're putting ourselves in a place to be able to have an experience with the living God. And that's half the battle for most of us, because we don't give him the time and attention that we could. And we suffer a lot because it is Christ that does all the healing. Another neat thing that Summer mentioned was that trust is not just information-based. It's an embodied experience of expectation that's built over time. Now, I had to rethink that phrase, because if you think of any kind of trust building exercise, or if I meet with you one time and we set up an appointment and you don't show up, my belief in your ability to be there for me later on is kind of broken a little bit. And if you don't show up a second and third time, then I just consider you a flaky person. And it's hard for me to build that relationship because I can't quite trust that you'll show up when you say you will. I think that we may not realize how much we distrust God, because we may have a certain expectation of how we think God ought to show up, and we don't have that embodied experience of God showing up for us again and again and again. Instead, what we have is a prayer of asking the Lord for something, us not receiving it, or receiving the result, whatever we're asking for. Lord, I want some money. Lord, I want some better health. I want to be healed. Lord, I want you to show up in our relationship. And then things crumble or things don't work out the way that you think they ought to. And so trust is broken. And not only that, but we're angry. And Summer mentioned how anger is one of the main emotions that especially women have a hard time confessing, just sharing that we're angry with God. And I know that I've mentioned this before, but I just want to reiterate the lessons here that we learned from Summer, that there is a pattern here, that when we aren't able to kind of have those real live experiences with God and in building that trust and seeing him as a loving father and feeling of the love that he has for us, then it can be hard to not only share the truth in a safe relationship, but then it's hard to be able to receive everything that the Lord wants us to have. And so if you are wanting to deepen your relationship with God, there are links to everything that Summer offers in the description. And if you want to join me on anything that I'm doing, there will also be links down below, and you can check out any of the other videos that relate to this one. But thank you so much for listening. Have an incredible rest of your day, and know that when you are connecting with God, you can be in freedom and in joy. So have a good one. We'll talk to you later.